Hi everyone, and welcome back to the DCU Learning Beyond Lectures EdTech Talk podcast series. In today's podcast, we will be looking at remote working and productivity. I'm your host, Noel Browne, and I'm joined today by Microsoft's Head of Global Sales Operations, Colin Browne. Colin, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Noel. Good morning.
Good morning. So, Colin, you've been working with Microsoft for over 27 years now and have experienced firsthand the transition towards hybrid working. During our research, we found a study done by Finder that revealed that as of September 2024, approximately 41% of UK workers engage in remote working at least part-time during the week. Can you tell us a bit about your experience of the transition towards hybrid working?
Yeah, so hybrid working is not a new thing. Maybe COVID has accelerated our move to hybrid. Your stat was very interesting. Globally, you'll find that probably 65% of companies offer flexible working. And you will see as well that probably 60% of people are actually using that and prefer that as the way to work. I think it really is about every individual using the flexibility that companies are giving them to be as productive and as effective as possible. If you look at our history, many companies have had hybrid working or an equivalent of that over time now. Personally, I've actually worked in that type of a mode since probably 2006. And I know that there were a lot of fears coming into hybrid working. People were worried about whether it would impact productivity or not. 60% of people see it as more productive, 58% to be very precise. And others are challenged by some of the aspects that are lost through hybrid working. But the fact that it is hybrid, that very word in itself, means that you get a mix of both on-site, in-person working, as well as the productivity of working from remote locations, be it at home or other places. So I think that mix actually has made it very, very effective for both industry and for the people working in industry.
Okay. So you mentioned there about some of the challenges with remote working. Could you maybe give us an idea of some of the challenges that you have faced over the last 18 years of hybrid working and how you kind of came around to resolve these challenges?
Yeah, so there are many different challenges associated to it. The first and foremost one that everybody will probably bring up is productivity. The reality is that there are pluses and minuses from a productivity perspective. We all know how difficult it can be, particularly if you live in a built-up area, to get to an office. So there are definitely productivity gains for individuals in terms of the time saved by not being in an office or trying to get to an office. That means there's more time to get work done. And that really is meaningful in a multinational organization or in a small business where time is so precious on either end of that spectrum. That is certainly one of the things that I think comes up is productivity. On the other side of it, I would say that one of the things that you can never beat is meeting a person. So actually building a relationship. And the way I would think about that is that sometimes it's very difficult to tell somebody that what they're doing is ineffective, it's incorrect, or maybe there's a better way of doing it. Because I think human reaction sometimes is to be defensive. I would certainly be defensive sometimes when people give me constructive feedback, even though I want it. And I think that one of the challenges that we've probably seen with hybrid working is that when you take away that person-to-person connection, it's difficult sometimes to give people that feedback, particularly if it's the first time. Now, if I've gone and I've met with somebody, I've developed a relationship with that person, and now I'm on a hybrid work environment and I'm on a Teams call or some other methodology, and I'm telling them something that they need to focus on or be constructive in my feedback to them, it's much easier once you've developed that relationship. But hybrid happening and accelerating the way it did during COVID became a challenge because we hired a lot of people. And even in my own organization, in Microsoft, I think we have about 50 to 60% of the organization have joined in the last 3 to 5 years. So it's a very new organization for the majority of the workforce. And having joined in that window, they joined during COVID. So how do you give constructive feedback? How do you help people understand that while you're trying to grow and develop them, that the feedback you're giving them is coming from a meaningful place and a positive place when you've never actually met them in person? So I think that has been one of the real challenges behind hybrid working is how do you develop those relationships? I think post-COVID, we've been able to build back some of the relationships. It doesn't mean you need to travel all the time or meet in person all the time, but you need that sense of the person, who they're about, what they're about, what you're about, and get to know one another. And I think that has helped us post-COVID, coming out of that period, to build personal relationships, which means you can be more effective in a hybrid work environment by balancing both the personal human interaction and then the remote interaction that you get in hybrid.
Yeah. So in your view then, the kind of balance between in person and online working is kind of the most important thing, rather than, say, if we were to go to a full remote working landscape, like it would be a lot more difficult to...
Yeah, I believe it would. And I also think that what you see in some of the data is that that's not what everybody wants either. They don't want to be remote. What you'll find is that probably 60% of people prefer to be hybrid and to be have that mix. 40% actually prefer to be on site. And I see that in my own work environment, where people have hybrid work agreements. That's what we refer to them as. We have a flexible work environment. We don't use the word hybrid as much. We use the word flexible. And what we essentially do is we empower people to make decisions around how they're going to be most effective. And we actually look at it over a 12-week period, and we pick the best 8 weeks from that 12-week period in terms of what people have done relative to their hybrid work commitments. So a hybrid work commitment, what does that mean? All it means is that what I'm agreeing with my manager or with my management chain is that I'm going to be in the office 20% of the time, 40% of the time, 60% of the time, whatever that is. And that then you're doing what you say you're going to do. So now that we've made the agreement, are you coming in 60% of the time? Now, assuming you're doing that, then you have the flexibility that you need to be effective and productive within those requirements. So I mentioned looking at the best 8 of 12 weeks. So really what that means, if I agree to come in 60% of the time, I might have come in for the first couple of weeks in a month, and I'm not coming in for the last couple of weeks in a month. Or I might have come in for the first couple of days in a week and not the last couple of days of the week. And what I'm doing is, particularly in a global environment, I'm looking at who am I working with and where are they? Because I may spend some time on the ground in another part of the world. I may be in the US meeting people in person. And then I may decide that the following week I'm actually going to work from home all that week because I've spent in-person time with folks in the US, in my example, the previous week. So we're figuring out collectively in both those small organizations or larger ones like my own, what works and what's going to be most effective to getting our work done on a day-to-day basis.
So you mentioned kind of there that some weeks you might work from home for the entire week. And I suppose what I'm kind of thinking here, how would you create a boundary then if there's no physical boundary between work and your home life? How do you create the boundary to separate those two, I suppose, while you're working from home all week?
I'm probably the worst person to ask because I suppose to some extent I'm a bit like broadband or electricity. I feel like I'm always on. But I know that talking to my peers and colleagues, that some of them get very disciplined about it, and they have their boundaries. They set out days in the week whereby they're going to do early morning calls or they're going to do late night calls, and they set boundaries around what days they're going to finish at certain times because maybe they've got family commitments, if they've got personal commitments that they want to see to. And I think that's vitally important. So I wouldn't put myself forward as a good example, but it is a good principle to ensure that you put guidelines around how you're going to work and when you're going to step away from that. The other thing I'd share is someone said to me, a mentor at one point in my career, he said, and particularly probably because I made that always on analogy, he said, sometimes you have to think of your work like a suit or a costume. And you come in and you put on that costume or that suit as you go in the door and you take it off when you go away. So I think that's something that probably people need to think about as well, is how do they differentiate in their own mind work from home life and make clear boundaries and take off that suit as they walk away from the job at any given time and any given day.
Okay. So I'm just going to talk about a bit about productivity, like you mentioned earlier there. And I suppose in terms of tech companies, and especially Microsoft, we could see the emergence of generative AI is a massive increase to productivity. So from a study from Harvard Business Review, we found that productivity could be boosted at around 7% annually over a 10-year period. How would you believe that this productivity boost is going to benefit Microsoft and companies like Microsoft over this 10-year period?
Firstly, I think it's very conservative. I think there's a lot of productivity that we'll start to see from artificial intelligence. Let me give you an example. It's always good to use practical examples. We've got a lot of sellers in Microsoft, and part of what I'm responsible for is some of the outsource selling we do through partner companies. And what we're looking at, even in this year alone, is how do we drive a 20% increase in revenue per head? So increase the level of revenue that those sellers are bringing back to Microsoft. And how we're doing that is we're looking at all of the different AI capabilities that are out there, and particularly Copilot and Copilot for Sales. And what we'll do is we are looking at the day-to-day work of that seller and how do we make them more productive. So if you're a seller, a lot of your time is going to be getting ready for a customer call. So you're going to think about who's your customer, what do they need, what's their profile look like, what have they expressed interest in, and you're going to do all that research in advance. But what if AI gives you that customer profile and tells you exactly all that information without you having to go and research it, which is traditionally what we would have done? Now you roll forward to the actual customer call. You're going on to that customer call, you have your customer brief, you know what the customer is interested in, and you're able to tell them up front what you think some of their concerns are. The second thing is listening then to the customer and hearing what is it that they're interested in. And as you're hearing that, you can use AI to actually analyze some of the concerns and questions that are coming your way and have it prepare you for the answer that you need to provide and to give the customer an insight as to what solutions you can probably bring to the table to help them be more productive, right? So now you're having a more efficient conversation with the customer. So firstly, you had an efficient preparation for the call, now you have a more efficient call with them. Now you finish the call and you walk away from it. Typically, you're not going to land a deal on the first call. So you're going to have to build that relationship with the customer and go through iterations of what they need, what you can deliver, and what the ultimate solution is. So you step away from that call and you need to summarize it. AI can do that for you. So Copilot will go and summarize the call for you. And secondly, you are going to now need to go and update whatever your CRM system is with all the information from the customer call you had. Copilot again can do that for you. So all of a sudden, you have massively increased the productivity of the seller in their relationship with the customer. And the ultimate outcome for that should be, firstly, you're increasing the cycle time of the customer journey, so bringing them from that initial contact through to making a sale. You're increasing the number of calls that seller can do with the customer, and ultimately you should be increasing both the volume of deals and the revenue associated to the deals that you're doing. So using those examples and points in the journey with the customer, you can easily see how we could probably be more ambitious in terms of the productivity gain, or, as I said at the start, the 20% revenue per head increase that we're looking for through the deployment of these capabilities.
Yes, that's very interesting. I think, it seems like the AI will increase productivity not only kind of in one particular area, but across the board, especially for sales operations, like you outlined there. I suppose my final question kind of would be, so throughout the course of our conversation here, we've kind of been talking about new technology, so like remote working, AI. But one of the key themes that I've seen that you've brought up throughout this conversation is the importance of interpersonal skills and building relationships with people, especially when you're working online and if you're using the likes of AI as well. So I suppose, is there any tips you can kind of give us and the listeners, of course, for developing interpersonal skills and making sure that we can stay connected with our co-workers, especially as we move towards a more remote kind of working environment and a tech-heavy, I suppose, working environment?
Yeah, look, there's kind of some skills that are ubiquitous almost. I don't think it matters what part of industry you go into. I think relationship management, as you've mentioned, is vitally important. It's about building a relationship and helping people understand where you're coming from, as well as understanding where they're coming from. So relationship management is probably the first thing I would talk about. And I think that you need to build an understanding of everybody's perspective and listen. Listen is one of the key things in that relationship management. If you're not listening and understanding what the other person wants or needs, then you're looking at it probably from a selfish point of view and not from their point of view. And that's not the basis of a strong relationship. So I think that's the first thing, is relationship management. Part of relationship management is also about self-awareness, and it's also about values. So it's understanding what your personal values are, being able to share them with others, understanding their values in return, and then building a mutual understanding. And from that mutual understanding builds trust. And trust is ultimately what most relationships are based on. And I think the other thing to remember from a relationship management perspective, the final thing I'd say on that particular point, is that a relationship is not just about a point in time. It's about a journey, and it's about how you help somebody now, they help you in the future, you help them again at a point beyond that. So I know that many relationships that have developed over time, I may not have been in contact with for many years, but could go back to at any point and help them, or vice versa, them help me. So relationship management is the first thing. Second thing I would say is change management. Be a good change enabler. And let's go back to the AI example that you talked about earlier. And I will be the first person to put my hand up and say that at the beginning of this journey, I was probably afraid. I have been through an IT industry that has had many, many changes over the years. And I actually remember talking to you 18 months ago about AI, and you were telling me about everything you were learning and everything that was really intriguing and interesting. But as I sat there talking to you, I did say to you at that point in time, I said, wow, I'm glad I'm at my stage of my career and not yours because of everything that's coming with AI. But as the conversation proceeded and we talked about some of the things and the technologies that were coming our way, one of my reflections, you'll remember at the end of that conversation, was probably 100 years ago, two people like us sat and talked and had a similar conversation. But their conversation was about, I'm not giving up my horse. My horse has never let me down. These automobiles are not going to take off. Yeah. Now we talk about autonomous vehicles 100 years later. We're at a point where we have a major industrial revolution happening right now. And it is AI, and it is what's coming with that. And as I reflected on that conversation, I become less afraid and more excited about the opportunities and everything that's ahead of us. And if I bring that back to change management, it's actually about adaptive leadership versus tactical leadership. How do we help bring people on a journey? How do we step back from what's in front of us and maybe the fear that's there and look at the journey that's going to happen ahead and how the world around us is going to change, and help people step away from the fear that I had and help them understand the opportunity that's there for them. Again, go back to some of our earlier conversation, and I talked about revenue and talked about trying to drive increased productivity. Well, when I went out to the companies we partner and work with, one of their biggest fears or challenges would have been, okay, with AI, you're just going to cut costs and it's going to mean you're spending less money with us. I flipped that conversation on their head and helped them understand that actually, no, we're predominantly in my business looking at small, medium businesses, and we can't get to all those customers. So AI is an opportunity to increase productivity. It's an opportunity to get to more customers, to help solve more problems for those customers. That changed the conversation, because back to change management and back to helping people understand the journey we're going to go on, it took us from a fear of losing revenue on their side and me reducing costs to an opportunity for them to increase business and get after more of our customers through having more productivity from the AI solutions that we were representing and presenting to them. So recapping, first thing I said was around relationship management. Second thing I said was around change management and being a good change agent. And the final thing I'd say is much more practical. It's program management. Understand whatever you're being asked to do. Think about it from a programmatic perspective. Understand what the inputs and outputs are and how you're going to measure it. And based on how you're going to measure it, know what the levers are to change performance up and down. Now that's the practical side of probably what anyone is learning in whatever course they're doing here in DCU. The former are more the transversal skills around how do you manage relationships, how do you engage and communicate with people, and then finally, how do you lead them through change and how do you manage change yourself? Because in my example, I was the first person I had to start with on that change journey.
Okay, I think there's some great advice there. Thanks again, Colin, for coming in to join us. That's all from us today. Thanks for listening.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you.